virtual book club. I am here with JF Penn to discuss
Hello.
Pentecost. So, how about you give us a little brief background for those of us who don't know
Yeah,
all of the
sure.
awesome things you've done?
Well, my name's Joanna, so I'm Joanna Penn, but I write fiction under JF Penn. My middle name is Frances, in case anyone's interested. And I write, I guess, action adventure, sort of Dan Brown meets Lara Croft, and Pentecost is the first in the Arcane series. And I also write dark, sort of more Stephen King books. I have a series called the London Psychic series. So I write those sort of two different kinds of fiction. And I also write non-fiction, and I have a site for authors as well at The Creative Penn with a double N. So writing is kind of my thing these days, and thank you for letting me talk about Pentecost.
All right. So, I guess my first question is how long did the spark of the idea for Pentecost sort of germinate in your imagination before you started actually putting pen to paper?
Well, and it's funny you should ask that, because I have a lot of diaries. I've got one here as my latest one, just in case people want to see. So I write a lot of journals and diaries, and I was looking through a journal from 2004. I don't know why. I just pick one up occasionally, and I found in this journal 2004 a whole load of stuff about basically when Jesus rose from the dead and the power of God came in the tomb. It turned the rock that Jesus was in, what was laid on, into this powerful stone. Now, of course, I made that up because that's not in the Bible, but that idea came to me in 2004, and I wrote it in my diary, completely forgot about it, and then in 2009 I decided to write a novel, my first novel. Now, I've always read a lot. Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose was one of my favorite books. You're probably too young to remember that one. But Dan Brown, obviously, Da Vinci Code, and I have a master's degree in theology, so a lot of this kind of religious historical stuff was coming up. So basically it was 5 years from the first idea and then to actually start writing the book. And that first book, because Pentecost is my first novel, I've just written my 9th novel, so it's the first in the series. But essentially I wanted to write something that I love to read, and I think this is one of the reasons many writers get started. It's like, I want to really read something like this. So why don't I write that book and then see what happens? And also, I was traveling around. I had a big travel trip around Europe, so I was in Venice, in St. Mark's Square, and it was really flooded. It was like New Year 2008 or 2009, and the ceiling in St. Mark's Basilica has the 12 apostles and the Holy Spirit, the Pentecost event of the tongues of fire. It's just awesome. And when I was in there, I just thought this would be amazing to write about St. Mark's Basilica, to write about Rome and St. Peter's and all these brilliant places in the world that I've traveled to because I love traveling. So that's kind of how Pentecost, the idea for it, got started. And what I love to do with my thrillers is come up with something that's could be real. So the bodies of the apostles are actually buried at these churches around the world. There are actually bones and relics of the church. And so take that for real and then kind of add something and twist it a little bit into a story. So that's kind of where I guess I started writing.
So I know you've written a lot of nonfiction as well. So what was the hardest part about that transition from writing nonfiction to writing fiction?
Well, it's a really good question, because I think a lot of people, if you're a reader, you think, oh, you just write a story. I know what a story is. I've read a lot of them. But what was so interesting going from non-fiction to fiction? So with non-fiction, you come up with like a table of contents and you can fill in the blanks, and it's like an essay or a job, what you write in your job, and you make it interesting, but generally it's organized series of information and inspiration. With a story, there are things that you've not necessarily done before. For example, dialogue. So dialogue, when two characters talk to each other, this is not something you write in any other form of work, apart from, you know, like if you write a play, you know, if you write a screenplay or whatever. But generally, this kind of dialogue and the way we're speaking together, this is not dialogue as you would write it, because there's all kind of hesitation and there's repetition and, you know, so, and lots of M's and filler words. So dialogue was a really big issue, and I basically had to learn to write dialogue, and I'm still learning. I do a lot of screenwriting training and that type of thing. So dialogue was a big thing. The idea of a scene is another thing. So a scene, for example, going back to St. Mark's Basilica in Venice, I've got two characters, so whose point of view am I telling it from? And with my arcane books, it's Dr. Morgan Sierra, who is an Oxford University psychologist, ex-Israeli military, so she's, you know, kick-ass as well as really hot. So I generally tell the story from her point of view, and then where is it taking place? So in this case, this was a night scene in St. Mark's Basilica with the flooding of the waters, very atmospheric, and it's dark, and you go into the St. Mark's Basilica, and then what happens in the scene? And basically we're looking for the Pentecost stone in St. Mark's Basilica. So where is it? And that's kind of the point of the scene, is finding the stone. And then within that there are, you know, there's dialogue and there's action and all that. But this idea of the scene is something that's completely different to non-fiction. So I would say that essentially you have to learn a whole load of other skills to actually write a novel, and your main aim, of course, is to please your reader and keep them turned, especially with a thriller like I write. You have to turn the pages. That's the point.
What was the most interesting thing that you learned that you didn't know before when you were doing research for all of these, you know, sites around the world and historical and religious sort of facts?
Well, I think because I studied the early church when I was at university at Oxford, and so I knew quite a lot of it already. Mm-hmm. But what was interesting, so I knew a lot about the history of the apostles and where they were martyred, and, you know, I knew what I wanted to bring in. For example, Jerusalem, on the roof of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem is this ancient Egyptian Coptic church. And I knew that was going to come in, and so I knew a lot of really interesting stuff. And what I like is that when people read it, they can find out that interesting stuff, which is cool. But in terms of what I learned, what's so interesting when you write fiction, which I find anyway, is synchronicity seems to happen as you write. So, for example, I was reading about Carl Jung at the same time, and his Red Book had just been released, and his Red Book is his story of his own journal of a breakdown, and it's got loads of his pictures in, and he actually painted. And that book came out at the same time, and in that book is an image of a stone, a small, what looks like a stone. It's like a grey round object with a pillar of fire coming out of the stone, and I was like, oh my goodness, it's a Pentecost stone. That's my idea. And Carl Jung drew my idea, you know, 100 years ago. That's so cool. Like, that synchronicity.
Yeah.
That's things that you thought you'd imagine actually are real. So I put Carl Jung into the book, and also Sigmund Freud, and a meeting they actually had in America. So what was amazing was the other things that I discovered as I researched that fitted what I had made up as fiction. And I think this is the hallmark of what I like in a thriller, is it could almost be true.
Yeah. Cool.
It is cool. And this is what's so fun. I mean, and now what I do, of course, so I just go and do research trips and then write a book about them. So, for example, I said to my husband, let's go to Budapest. We went to Budapest for a long weekend, and then in order that I could write a book about it, and I've written One Day in Budapest, which, you know, obviously is set there and stuff. So this is how I now do my research. I decide where I want to go, and then I come up with a story around the awesome place. And living in Europe is brilliant because there's so many opportunities. Although
There's
my next book is there is, but my next novella is actually One Day in New York. So I've actually done a book about New York coming soon.
Yeah, I haven't actually been there yet.
There you go. You must go. You're in America.
I know I'm an American, and like the two most famous places I haven't been. So how has your writing process changed from writing Pentecost to what you do now? What have you sort of moved away from, and what has stayed the same the whole way through?
Well, I think that research process has stayed the same. So pretty much everything I write is based on a trip, an actual research trip or something I've seen. So my London Psychic series is based on my you know, where I am in London and the things I see in London and the weird, wacky museums we have here, and, you know, some of the strange occurrences that go on in London. So that stayed the same. All my books are based on that kind of research. And I mean, until I write something that's kind of post-apocalyptic or a complete fantasy, then yeah, I guess that'll stay the same. What has changed is I understand now by book 9, you know, that how to actually structure a novel. So certainly with Pentecost, it was, when I wrote the first draft, I mean, I did about 8 drafts of Pentecost, and I had a whole load of editors, and I was learning how to write a story. I did do a rewrite on it last year, so, you know, because I've got a lot better now. But essentially it's, you know, I think I've just understood how story structure works and how to do, you know, how to end chapters so there's a cliffhanger and that type of thing. I've also kind of relaxed into my character, because in the first book, Morgan Sierra is kind of my alter ego. She's, you know, just Krav Maga, and she's really, she can fight, but she's also a psychologist, and so that's kind of interesting. So I've kind of relaxed into her, and also her arcane partner, Jake Timber. The One Day in New York, I've actually written from his perspective, which is the first time I've written from a male point of view. So that's quite a new thing. So I'm, you know, playing with those aspects of it. But definitely I've got my process more sorted, and now I feel like I'm really writing the story as opposed to struggling to work out how to write a story.
I think that happens with like learning anything new. The first time you try, it's always difficult, and then it gets more streamlined, maybe.
But also that's what editors are for. When it comes to being a writer, your editor is really important for actually helping you work through the problems and getting a brilliant finished product.
So, if you were your own inspiration for Morgan Sierra, was there any particular person or combination of people that were sort of your inspiration for her partner, Jake?
Well, I would say
is he just like made up?
Well, in terms of inspiration, I mean, I say she's my alter ego. My inspiration for the character was probably more Angelina Jolie in Lara Croft, or Mr. and Mrs. Smith, or Salt. So that kind of kick-ass, you know, kind of character. Mr. and Mrs. Smith is a good movie.
It's an excellent movie.
Excellent movie. And I love these action movies. So my Arcane series is seriously action movie stuff. And then Jake, well, you know, really, it's kind of Hugh Jackman. Is probably my Hugh Jackman. I would like to say in Wolverine.
Yeah.
I mean, why not pick him in that? But yeah, that kind of, he's got that kind of look, I suppose. But I do, when I write, I do, for all my characters, including my bad guys and everything, I do take screenshots of photos from the internet and keep them on my desktop, so I can actually, remember what everybody looks like and
Yeah.
what they're kind of doing. I found found a really hot Egyptian actor for my book Exodus. When Morgan has a brief affair, kind of in the James Bond vein. So that was fun.
Yeah. Um, I think we might have one more question. Um, so I guess tell us a little bit about what we should be most excited for with reading as we read Pentecost.
Well, I think it depends what kind of reader you are, because I think my Arcane series appeals on two different levels. Well, at least I hope it does. It appeals on that level of, like, we're talking about like an action movie. It opens with it opens in Varanasi in India as a nun is running away from the bad guys, and she ends up being burned to death on the banks of the Ganges at the burning ghats, which is amazing. And I've been there and watched them burning the bodies and everything. And I'm always seeing murder scenes everywhere, obviously. And so it opens with this, murder scene, and that is kind of the high body count in my books. They are action adventure, they are pretty fast paced. So that's kind of one level. You can read it as that kind of story. And then there's also this other level of I'm fascinated with religion, but I'm not a believer. So all my books have this edge of supernatural, and faith versus skepticism, as my characters try and work out what they believe. And there's also that kind of historical element, travel element, psychology. So I hope that people will also learn things, but mainly it's meant to be like a kick-ass action adventure thriller type of thing. And Pentecost is available for free as an ebook on all platforms except Nook. Nook is 99 cents. You can't do free. Nook.
That's weird.
It's free everywhere else. So if people want to try it, they can try it for free there, or you can check out my site at jfpenn.com, where there are other free books you can try. So I really, encourage people to give it a go, and hope you enjoy meeting Morgan Sierra and Jake Timber.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I read One Day in Budapest. So I'm really looking forward to reading the rest of them.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm encouraging everybody to get into Krav Maga and get into the action adventure spirit. So
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for chatting with us.
No worries. It's been really fun, and I hope everyone enjoys the book. And you can always contact me through my website if anyone's got any other questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Bye.